Greetings and welcome back to room 303 in our chats with Emily, as we are calling our readings through the poetry of Emily Dickinson contained in the Johnson edition. We turn out a poem 564, My Period Had Come for Prayer, published in the Saturday Review of Literature, number 5 of 9 March 1929. This is back to Emily as theologian. This is back to Emily in the question of theodicy. Why must there be pain and suffering in the world? And in some ways, we're back to a couple of poems we've already studied. Do you guys remember poem 61? Papa, above, regard a mouse o'erpowered by the cat, reserve within thy kingdom a mansion for the rat, sung in seraph cupboards to nibble all the day, while unsuspecting cycles wheel solemnly away. Do you remember when we did 376, one of her most radical poems? Of course I prayed, and did God care? He cared as much as on the air a bird had stamped her foot and cried, give me my reason, life I had not had, but for yourself 'twere better charity to leave me in the Adam's tomb, merry and naught and gay and numb, than this smart misery. We're going to see some of this smart misery again in this amazing poem in which Emily is going to play the role of skeptic. Now, maybe not fully skeptic. Well, I'll let you debate it as we get to the end of the poem. Our assumptions are that you've been following our stuff at learnstrong.net. Down that left-hand side, Chats with Emily's our playlist. I'm hopeful that you worked through our set of introductory comments. I'm hopeful that as well you've already read through our preceding 563 poems. We just finished with 563. I could not stop to prove. Now, the question of this poem is, does prayer actually work? Now, Emily is playing into tradition here, where there's two kinds of prayer. There is the prayer of help, the petitioning kind of prayer, and there's the prayer of thanks. In this poem, this will be the worship or the gratitude prayer, and often those two prayers are going to be quite different. Some have argued this is not as polished a poem as other poems of Emily's that play in the same vein. I'm going to leave that to you guys to decide. I find this a compelling statement poem about, in the end, what it means to pray for Emily. Remember, Emily, of course, raised within a Calvinist tradition where prayer is central to understanding the life of faith. She says it this way: my period had come for prayer, no other art would do, my tactics missed a rudiment. Creator, was it you? God grows above, so those who pray horizons must ascend, and so I stepped upon the north to see this curious friend. His house was not, no sign had he, by chimney nor by door could I infer his residence. Vast prairies of air, unbroken by a settler, were all that I could see. Infinitude, hast thou no face that I might look on thee? The silence condescended. Creation stopped for me. But awed beyond my errand, I worshipped, did not pray. Now, of course, notice pray as the last word, set in quotation marks and not capitalized. Of course, notice prayer capitalized at the beginning. I think there's a whole lot going on here in relationship to her dance with Job, as we have referenced it a number of times. You'll remember the book of Job. I think the book of Job is one of the most important books for Emily, along with, obviously, as we said, the book of Revelation. Why? Because the book of Job is a theodicy, a question about the pain and the suffering. Why must one pray in the first place? Usually it will be because of some pain or suffering that has occurred. Notice, my period had come for prayer. The idea of the period here, of course, is I'd gone through something that required prayer. And again, she'll reference prayer in 20 of her poems. We just mentioned 61 and 376. No other art would do. Notice the use of the word art. Almost seems that the word art suggests some kind of contrivance of a kind. In other words, I had tried everything else. Art had not solved my problem, so I had to pray. Notice my tactics. It's interesting that she juxtaposes art with tactics. Missed a rudiment, and then notice the dashes, which makes it difficult to know exactly how to read this line. Creator, dash, was it you? Now I want to point out, this poem is constructed around two questions. Did you see them? The two question marks. I'm sure you already circled them in your volume and annotated them. The first one was it you, Creator? Notice the next word is God, right? God grows above, right? That is to say, in heaven. So those who pray horizons must ascend. Of course, horizons and orisons, it's brilliant. It's brilliant the way she plays the game with language, right? Must ascend. You'll remember this word ascend from our study of 306. And so, I stepped up on the north. And there, of course, is her referencing the Job 26, 5 through 7, God in the north. Of course, the north is where it is cold, where nothing grows and the like. I stepped up on the north, she says, to see. Now, of course, think about stepped, back to our 563 poem of feet, and think about the last line of 563 with I see. To see this curious friend. Go back to our study of 92, poem 92, to see the idea of friend there. Notice curious, capitalized. Now, is she speaking about God here? In other words, I went to the north. I ascended to the horizon to find God. His house was not. So all of a sudden now, she's making some observation about heaven. Again, her study of the book of Revelation, I think, is acute in a poem like this. His house was not. No sign had he by chimney nor by door. Could I infer, I think that's the key word of the whole poem, actually, his residence. And then she'll tell us, vast prairies of air. You guys remember when we did 564, an abyss with air? Vast prairies of air, unbroken by a settler. In other words, I found nothing. It's like the Badlands that we know out here, or the Outlands, as we sometimes will refer to them. Unbroken by a settler were all that I could see. Again, she keeps returning to sight in this poem, doesn't she? Infinitude, only time she ever used this word is in this poem. Infinitude, notice set off in dashes. Eternity, if you will. Hast thou no face that I might look on thee? Now, Emily's readers would immediately understand she's referencing the Exodus 33:20 passage, where God will say to Moses, quote, thou canst not see my face, for there shall no man see me and live. In other words, there seems to be this longing for Emily to have some kind of face-to-face correspondence. Why? So she can have a conversation a la Job with deity to ask about what? Well, whatever this period was that led to her suffering, her pain. She says, the silence condescended. Condescended, you'll remember from our study of 102. Creation stopped for me. In other words, it was like I came to realize there was no point in trying to find God, because God could not be found. All I found was silence. And of course, we immediately think about that voice out of the silence, right, that the prophet Isaiah will speak of. The silence condescended. Creation stopped for me. Notice the cessation. The poem, there's all this movement of the poem, and then all of a sudden there's this cessation. There's this moment of stoppage, right? But, the key word, awed beyond my error. So all of a sudden there's this moment in the silence where she is awed, and all of a sudden the prayer, her errand, her prayer stops. And then she says, after the dash, I worshipped. Only one time in all of Emily's 1,775 poems does Emily use the word worshipped. And it's here, it's in this moment. I worshipped, dash. Did not, quote unquote, pray, dash. Now, when we get to poem 576, we'll come back to this set of lines because they're so important. I prayed at first, a little girl, because they told me to, but stopped when qualified to guess how prayer would feel to me. If I believe God looked around each time my girlish eye fixed full and steady on his own in childish honesty and told him what I'd like today in parts of his far plan that baffled me, the mingled side of his divinity, and often sense in danger I count the force 'twould be to have a God so strong as that to hold my life for me, till I could take the balance that tips so frequent now, it takes me all the while to poise, and then it doesn't stay. And when we get to poem 1751, right at the end of our study together, we'll hear it this way. There comes an hour when begging stops, when the long interceding lips perceive their prayer is vain. Thou shalt not is a kinder sword than from a disappointing God. Disciple, call again. Now, what are we going to do with a poem like this at level 2A? The messages and themes. I think her point is that sometimes there are no answers, but silence. And the silence leads to awe, and the awe leads to worship. I mean, think about the powerful silence that is elicited from looking at the sunset, or standing in front of a great work of art, or, dare we say it, an amazing poem like this. So you guys have commented a number of times how after the study of one of these poems, you are kind of left in an interesting silence that produces a certain kind of awe, and dare we say it out loud, a certain kind of worship even as well. At 2B, think about the gains that Emily is playing here in regards to a number of things. Like, for example, think about the power of the alliteration. Period, prayer of stanza 1, God grows, and so stepped, see in stanza 2. His house had he, stanza 3. Silence stopped and condescended creation in stanza 5. Think of the assonance that you can hear as well. Grows, those in stanza 2, nor, door, and prairies, air in stanza 3, I, might, silence in stanzas 4, 5. And hear the consonants as well. Must, ascend, so, stepped, see, this, curious in stanza 2. Silence, condescended, creation, stopped in stanza 5. The point we're making is that Emily's on her game here, no doubt about it. She's clearly, can we even say it, inspired. At 3A, well, we mentioned 751 and 576, but I can't help but read a poem like this and not think about St. Augustine's Confessions. We've given full lectures at learnstrong.net. Think about the power of the longing for some kind of answer that Augustine will speak to in his Confessions over and over again. It is the same dance of coming up against a certain kind of silence and being awed by it in some profound way. Finally, at 3B, to own a poem like this, when was a time that you were left in awe, created by a certain kind of silence? Maybe reading these poems is doing that for you. I hope so. Thank you.